Okay, our final speaker for the second Long Road session is Jennifer Zakrajsek. She is a senior research associate in the behavioral sciences group at UMTRI, and her title is Driving Status Violation and Crashes, Data from State Records.
Great, thank you, Dave, and good afternoon, everyone. And as Dave mentioned, I'll be talking about the driving record piece of the Long Road study. And I'm here on behalf of all the Long Road collaborators that assisted in this piece of the study at every point from planning through to the collection of the driving records. And as some of the previous speakers have already told you, we are collecting driving records as a part of the study. And one of the things that's a little unique about this piece of the data collection, especially from a standpoint of trying to standardize across the different sites, is that each site is obtaining these records for their participants from their respective state motor vehicle agencies. And so, each state will have its own format for the records. Each state also will have its own procedures and protocols that the sites have to follow in order to obtain those records. So that makes having a standardized procedure not possible. So we just try to keep everything as close as we can between the sites. And also, we are doing the driving record checks at multiple times during the participants' time in the study. We do the first check at baseline. And the purpose of that is to do the confirmation of the participants' eligibility as far as having a current valid driver's license. As was mentioned earlier, they'll present their license at the baseline or enrollment appointment, and then as soon as possible, the sites will check the driving records to confirm that. And again, the amount of time between that check and when it happens, again, varies based on whatever arrangements they have with their state. In Michigan, we are fortunate at UMTRI that as part of our institute, we have a group called CMIST, which is the Center for the Management of Information for Safe, Sustainable Transportation. And CMIST actually works with the state to obtain records. So in Michigan, the information that we need for our driving record data collection comes from two sources. One is from a driver history database that is maintained by the Michigan Secretary of State's office, and then also the detailed information about crashes we get from crash records that are maintained by the Michigan State Police. And CMIST actually maintains both databases that are available for research purposes, so we're able to obtain this information in-house, which is very helpful to us. One thing about the driver history records here in Michigan, we don't have access to the live database for that. The Michigan Secretary of State's office provides CMIST with a snapshot of their full database 2 times a year. So we typically get it in the fall and in the spring. So we have those 2 time periods that we're able to get a new set of data. So we do the baseline check, and again, confirming the initial driving status, and then we also go back, use the records to collect the offenses and crashes that participants have in the 5 years leading up to baseline. And then from that period, we also do annual checks during the 4 years that participants are in the study after baseline. So potentially for participants that remain in the study and continue driving all the way through, we could have 9 years of driving data. And so now I'll tell you a little bit about the data that we are collecting. So as far as looking at driving status, so we're looking at whether participants have a valid license or if there have been any changes. So if their license is restricted, suspended, revoked, canceled, disqualified, surrendered. And in our baseline check here in Michigan so far, everybody has had a valid license at baseline, which is what we would expect. So that was good to see. And so after that, we'll look at any changes. We'll be able to track any changes that occur now from their baseline period moving forward. And as far as citations or offenses, we look at 3 categories of those. The first are moving violations, and this is a list of the moving violations that kind of the 5 sites when comparing the driving records that are available in the different states. This is the list of violations that were, for the most part, common among all the sites. There will be, for all the information I'll be presenting for both the offenses and crashes, as far as the data we're collecting from site to site, there might be a couple of variables that aren't available in those states' records, but for the most part, this is the collective group of information that we'll see in the driving records. So the moving violations that we'll be recording are speeding, backing unsafely, failing to keep right, failing to signal, following too closely, improper passing, improper turns and U-turns, unsafe lane changes, disobeying signs, failing to stop on signals, not giving the right of way to pedestrians or vehicles, driving the wrong way, passing a stopped school bus, crossing over the center divider or median, driving on the shoulder, and then we have some that are kind of more equipment related, defective brake lights, defective brakes, defective or improper use of headlights, and then improper or missing license plates, and then cell phone use, improper cell phone use or illegal cell phone use, depending on states' laws, and then also safety belt violations. Another category of offenses we'll be looking at are administrative violations. So these are operating without insurance, registration, license, or failure to comply. And then the third category of offenses are criminal offenses. So driving under the influence of drugs or alcohol, or having open intoxicants in the vehicle, or violating ignition interlock requirements. And as for the crash data, we are collecting detailed crash information, and it's both on the crash level, vehicle level, and person level. So you can see in the first column are some of the items that we're looking at on the crash level, and it's day and time of week of the crash, light condition, weather, if it's a property damage or personal injury crashes. For the most part, for most states, crashes that appear in state records of crashes tend to be have to have property damage and or personal injury to meet that threshold to have a record or have a report filed by a police agency. So also we'll be looking at the police agency that conducted the investigation at the crash scene, and then information about the location of the crash, and road characteristics, which include, there are a lot of different variables we'll be looking at for road characteristics, including if it's a straight or curved road, if there's a grade, or if it's flat, the number of lanes, if it's one-way or two-way, if there's a median, or if it's divided in any way, there's access control, the type of road system, so if it's county, city, interstate, and then also the area of the crash on the road, so if it was at an intersection, coming out of a driveway, just going straight on the road, and then also if there were any traffic controls involved. And then we'll also be looking at the road condition, which mostly relates to the weather, so if it was wet, snowy, icy. Number of vehicles involved, and then crash type, so that would be if it was a head-on, rear end, and then also looking at that, what the primary crash event was, so if it was a crash with a vehicle, crash with a pedestrian, with a fixed object. Looking at the vehicle level, items or variables we'll be looking at. The first one, driver factors contributing to the crash. That primarily is concerned with the participant as a driver. So that, as far as the Michigan records, we gather this information from a couple of sources in the record. There are a couple of items where the investigating officer we'll kind of summarize hazardous actions or contributing factors by a driver. And we also get a copy of the crash report, so we'll read the narrative of that, and using all those things in combination, we'll determine if there are driver factors from our participant that contributed to the crash. And then the second item is the driver action prior to the crash, and we record that both for the participant and any other drivers or pedestrians involved in the crash, and that's just recording what that person was doing before the crash. So if they were driving straight, turning, if they were a pedestrian, if they were crossing the road, and then also information on the vehicles themselves. And then on the person level, if the driver was using restraint, using safety belt, and then also if there were any injuries involved in the crash, information on those individuals as far as age, sex, what vehicle they were in, what position they were in the vehicle, if they were using restraints, and then also the severity of their injury. So that was the information, the data that we're collecting. And so again, we're looking at that for the 5 years prior to baseline and then moving forward each year. And so as some of the others have, even though we don't have complete data available yet, we did take a look at some preliminary data just for Michigan. And so this is for the first 380 participants in Michigan that came through and did their baseline. So this is looking at the 5 years prior to baseline. So we've had 45 offenses from the 380, and those offenses are from about 11% of the participants, as you can see. And for the most part, those that had offenses had one. And over half of the offenses were speeding related. And then looking at crashes, so those 380 participants have had 92 crashes during the 5 years prior to baseline. And so that was so about 21% of the participants had a crash, and again, most of them were one. And looking at the contributing crash factors, again, this would be by the participants as drivers. For more than half of them, there wasn't anything noted by the investigating officers that the participants contributed to the crash. And when there were, the most common factor was failure to yield the right-of-way. And these are just some very general jumping off point topics or questions that could be addressed. And I know the Long Road collaborators have a lot of ideas for more specific things to be looking at. So stay tuned and keep an eye on the Long Road website for those reports as they come out. That's it.